The hall was already awake before the audience arrived. Chairs were arranged in perfect rows. Lights reflected warmly off polished wood, and the grand piano stood at the center like a symbol of status and achievement. Everything about the place spoke of prestige and discipline. Only those who belonged were meant to touch the stage. Maria arrived early as she always did, pushing her cleaning cart quietly along the side corridor. She wore a simple uniform faded from many washes, her hair tied back neatly, her movements careful so she would not disturb anything important. She had worked in this concert hall for years and knew every corner better than most musicians. To everyone else she was invisible. Staff passed by without greeting her, performers barely noticed her presence. She accepted this as part of the job. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than attention. Maria was not always a cleaning lady, though few people would ever imagine otherwise. Her life before this place felt distant now, like a memory wrapped in dust. She once lived in a small town where music was not a profession but a language spoken at home. Her father played piano at family gatherings, not perfectly but with heart. And Maria learned to listen before she learned to speak. As a child, she would sit beside the piano and copy his movements in the air, memorizing how sound and feeling worked together. She never had formal lessons, there was never money for that. But music stayed with her quietly through years of responsibility and loss. Life changed when her parents passed away within a short time of each other. Maria was still young. Responsibility came suddenly and heavily. She took whatever work she could find, moved to the city, and learned how quickly dreams could be folded away for survival. Music never left her entirely, but it became something private, something she carried inside while mopping floors and wiping dust from instruments she was never meant to play. Late at night, when the hall was empty, she sometimes paused beside the piano and rested her fingers lightly on the closed lid, imagining the sound rather than creating it. On this particular morning, the hall was preparing for a special event. A famous pianist was scheduled to rehearse before an evening performance. Staff moved quickly, tension floated in the air. Maria stayed out of the way as instructed. The pianist arrived surrounded by assistants and admiration. His reputation filled the room before he played a single note. He was known for brilliance and humor and a sharp tongue. People laughed easily around him, eager to please. As he warmed up at the piano, his playing echoed confidently through the empty hall, powerful and precise. Staff paused to listen. Maria continued working, but her pace slowed. Her ears followed every phrase instinctively. The pianist stopped suddenly and laughed loudly. He joked that the hall felt too serious, too stiff. He wanted something lighter, something joyful. His voice carried easily across the space. He noticed Maria standing nearby, holding her cleaning cloth. Perhaps for the first time truly seeing her, amusement flickered across his face. He gestured toward the piano and laughed again, telling her to play something joyful. The comment was meant as humor, a moment of mockery disguised as charm. People nearby chuckled politely. Maria froze, her face flushed with embarrassment. She shook her head softly and tried to step back. The pianist insisted playfully, repeating his request louder this time. The attention turned fully toward her. The laughter grew. Maria felt the familiar weight of being underestimated press against her chest. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open beneath her. But something deeper stirred inside her, a quiet strength she had buried for years. She thought of her father's hands moving freely across old keys. She thought of nights when music was the only comfort she had. Her hands trembled as she set the cleaning cloth aside. The room fell quiet out of curiosity more than respect. Maria walked slowly toward the piano, each step heavy with doubt. She sat on the bench carefully, adjusting her posture without realizing she was doing it exactly right. The pianist leaned back smiling, confident that this would end in laughter. Maria placed her hands on the keys. The surface felt familiar in a way that surprised even her. She took a breath and pressed the first note. The sound was soft but clear. Something shifted immediately. The laughter faded. The pianist straightened slightly. Maria continued playing, the melody gentle and warm, filled with feeling rather than technique. She did not play to impress. She played to remember. The music flowed naturally, as if it had been waiting patiently for years. The hall responded with perfect acoustics, wrapping the sound around every listener. People stopped moving. Conversations ended. The pianist's expression changed from amusement to confusion, then to focus. Maria's eyes remained on the keys. She forgot where she was, forgot who was watching. The years between her and the music dissolved. She played as she once had in quiet rooms for no one but herself. The melody grew stronger, richer, joy surfaced without force. The sound filled the hall completely. When she finished, the final note lingered in the air. No one spoke. The famous pianist stared at her, unable to laugh now. The hall that once felt controlled and rigid stood transformed by something simple and honest. Maria lifted her hands slowly and stood, ready to apologize, ready to return to her cart, unaware that everything had already changed. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, the silence that followed her playing did not break immediately. It held the room firmly as if sound itself needed time to understand what had just happened. Maria stood beside the piano with her hands folded tightly in front of her. Her heart beat fast and uneven. She expected laughter to return or someone to remind her of her place. Instead, the famous pianist remained still. His confident posture softened. The playful smile faded from his face. He looked at Maria as if seeing her for the first time without the mask of humor. The audience of staff and assistants waited uncertainly. A few seconds passed before he spoke. His voice was quieter than before. He asked where she had learned to play like that. The question carried genuine curiosity rather than mockery. Maria hesitated, unsure whether honesty would help or harm her. She answered simply that she learned by listening. She said music had always been around her even when she could not touch a piano. The pianist nodded slowly but did not respond right away. Others in the room exchanged glances, some impressed, some uncomfortable. The mood had shifted beyond a joke, and no one knew how to respond. One assistant cleared their throat and suggested returning to rehearsal. Another laughed nervously, trying to lighten the moment. But the sound felt forced and empty. The pianist turned back to the piano and began playing again, this time with more restraint. His usual confidence was altered by reflection. Maria quietly picked up her cleaning cloth and stepped away. Relief and confusion mixing together inside her, she returned to her duties, but her hands shook slightly as she worked. The sound of the piano followed her down the hallway. She wondered whether she had crossed an invisible line by accepting the invitation. Later that afternoon, Maria was called to the stage office. Her supervisor waited there with a concerned expression. Maria prepared herself for reprimand. She had learned not to hope in situations like this. The supervisor asked what had happened earlier. Maria explained carefully without drama. She did not accuse or defend. She simply described the moment. The supervisor listened and sighed. She said the hall valued professionalism and boundaries. Maria nodded, ready to accept whatever consequence followed. Instead, the supervisor paused and said the pianist had requested to speak with her again. The request unsettled Maria more than punishment would have. She followed the supervisor back toward the stage. Every step filled with uncertainty. The pianist waited by the piano alone this time. When Maria entered, he stood and thanked her for playing earlier. The words sounded sincere, though slightly awkward. He said her music had surprised him. Not because of skill alone, but because of feeling. He admitted that joy was something many trained musicians struggled to express naturally. Maria listened quietly, unsure how to respond. Praise felt unfamiliar and fragile. He asked if she would be willing to play again, not as a joke, but as a conversation. Maria hesitated, then agreed. She sat and played another short piece from memory. Something gentle and simple. The pianist listened carefully, leaning closer to the sound rather than performing himself. When she finished, he smiled but did not clap. He said music like that deserved silence rather than noise. The moment felt respectful and strange. Maria felt seen but exposed. She worried that this attention might follow her in unwanted ways. Word of the moment spread quickly through staff corridors. Whispers followed Maria as she worked. Some treated her with newfound curiosity, others with suspicion. A few smiled kindly while others avoided her. That evening, the hall filled with guests for the performance. Maria worked through the crowd quietly. The stage lights glowed warmly. The piano waited again at the center. As the famous pianist performed that night, something subtle changed in his playing. Moments of lightness and warmth appeared between technical brilliance. Maria listened from the side, unnoticed. As always, after the performance ended, the applause was thunderous. The pianist bowed and gestured toward the piano once more. His eyes briefly searched the crowd until they found Maria. He nodded slightly in acknowledgement. Maria felt her throat tighten. She looked away quickly and returned to her work. The world was not meant to shift so easily for people like her. In the days that followed, the pianist requested to meet Maria again, this time with the hall director present. Maria sat nervously as they spoke about talent, opportunity, and background. Words floated around her that felt too large. They asked if she had ever considered formal training. Maria answered honestly that life had not allowed such thoughts. She said music had always belonged to moments, not plans. The hall director suggested a small private audition for a group of local instructors. Nothing official, nothing promised. Just an opportunity to be heard properly. Maria felt conflicted. The idea frightened her. Attention threatened the balance she had built through years of quiet survival. Still, something inside her wondered what listening openly might lead to. She agreed cautiously, with the condition that her work would not be affected. The director assured her professionalism would be maintained. The audition was scheduled early one morning before the hall opened. Maria practiced quietly at night when no one watched. Returning to the piano felt both comforting and terrifying. On the morning of the audition, she wore her uniform again. She did not own anything else appropriate. She sat at the piano facing a small group of instructors and musicians. She played not to impress, but to speak honestly. Each piece carried memory rather than ambition. The listeners remained silent throughout, taking notes quietly. Maria could not read their expressions. When she finished, they thanked her and said they would discuss next steps. No promises were made. Maria returned to her cleaning cart and resumed work. The floor still needed mopping. Dust still needed wiping. Life continued without pause, yet something had shifted again. Not loudly but deeply. The hall that once ignored her now held space for her sound. She did not know whether that space would last or close again. But she knew one thing clearly: her music had been heard without laughter. And that alone felt like a beginning. The days after the small audition passed quietly on the surface, but inside Maria everything felt unsettled. She returned to her routine of early mornings and long corridors, cleaning rooms that echoed with music she was not allowed to claim. Yet something in her posture had changed. She stood a little straighter now, even when no one noticed. The instructors who had listened to her that morning did not speak to her again right away. No comments, no feedback, no promises. The silence reminded Maria of many moments in her life when hope appeared briefly and then faded. She tried to push expectations aside and focus on her work. Still, the memory of their attention stayed with her. The way they listened without smiling or judging. The way the room felt calm rather than amused. It was different from anything she had experienced before. One afternoon, the hall director asked Maria to step into his office again. The request made her stomach tighten. She feared being told that things had gone too far, that boundaries had been crossed. She prepared herself to return fully to invisibility. Instead, the director spoke gently. He said the instructors were impressed by her musical sensitivity and natural expression. He explained that while her technique lacked formal structure, her understanding of sound was rare. Maria listened quietly, gripping the edge of her chair. He told her they wanted to offer her access to the piano during certain hours after work. Supervised but private. No audience, no pressure, just space to explore and learn. The words felt unreal. Maria hesitated. She asked if this would interfere with her job. The director assured her it would not. Her position remained unchanged. The opportunity was separate and voluntary. She agreed cautiously, afraid that accepting too much kindness might cause it to disappear. That evening, she stayed after the hall emptied and returned to the piano room alone. The lights were dimmed, and the space felt intimate. Maria sat at the piano and rested her hands on the keys without playing for a long moment. The silence felt heavy with memory. Then she began slowly. She played pieces she remembered from childhood and melodies she had created over years of silence. Her fingers moved with growing confidence. Mistakes appeared but did not stop her. She corrected them instinctively. As nights passed, Maria began to feel something she had not felt in years. Permission, not from others but from herself. The famous pianist returned to the hall for another rehearsal later that week. This time his demeanor was quieter, more observant. When he noticed Maria nearby, he nodded politely rather than joking. The change did not go unnoticed. During a break, he approached her and asked how things were going. The question felt sincere. Maria answered honestly that she was playing more often now. Learning slowly, he smiled and said music often waited patiently for those who could not reach it sooner. The words stayed with her long after he walked away. Not everyone reacted positively to the attention Maria received. Some staff members whispered that she was getting special treatment. Others questioned whether boundaries were being blurred. Maria felt the weight of those looks and worked harder to remain invisible. One evening, a senior cleaner confronted her quietly, warning her not to forget her place. The words stung, but Maria did not argue. She understood fear disguised as resentment. Despite discomfort, Maria continued playing during her allotted time. Instructors occasionally listened from the back of the room, offering gentle guidance. Nothing formal, nothing demanding. They corrected her hand position, suggested exercises, explained concepts she had never known by name. Maria absorbed everything eagerly. At home in her small apartment, she practiced silently on the table, imagining the keys. Muscle memory guided her even without sound. Weeks passed, and her playing grew stronger, more controlled without losing warmth. The instructors began discussing possibilities more openly. They mentioned a local community concert, not prestigious, not publicized widely. A small event meant to share music rather than display status. They suggested Maria could participate if she wished. The idea terrified her. Performing intentionally felt different from being discovered accidentally. She worried that stepping onto a stage by choice would invite judgment. She was not ready to face. The hall director emphasized that the decision was hers alone. No obligation, no pressure. Maria asked for time. She spent nights thinking about the first moment she had played in that hall and the laughter that had followed. She also remembered the silence that replaced it. In the end, she agreed. Not for recognition, but for closure. She wanted to face the piano openly, without hiding behind a uniform or a joke. Preparation began quietly. She chose a simple piece that reflected calm joy rather than complexity. Instructors supported her, but did not control her interpretation. The day of the community concert arrived with little ceremony. The audience consisted of local family, students, and staff. No cameras, no sponsors. Maria stood backstage wearing borrowed black clothes that felt strange but respectful. Her hands trembled slightly when her turn came. She walked onto the stage and sat at the piano. The room felt smaller than she expected. Warmer, she began to play and felt the familiar connection return. The music flowed gently, filling the space without force. People listened attentively. Some smiled, some closed their eyes. There was no laughter this time, only presence. When she finished, the applause was sincere but modest. Maria stood and bowed quietly before leaving the stage. Backstage, the instructors congratulated her softly. The hall director thanked her for sharing her gift. The famous pianist who had once laughed approached her and said nothing at first, then simply told her that joy sounded different when it was real. Maria nodded, feeling something settle inside her. She did not respond with words that night. As she returned to her apartment, she realized something important had changed. She no longer played to prove she belonged. She played because the music asked her to, and she was finally listening. After the community concert, Maria expected life to return to its old shape. She believed the moment would fade quietly like so many others had before, but the hall no longer felt the same. People looked at her with a different awareness. Even when they said nothing, she continued her cleaning work each morning, pushing her cart through the familiar corridors. But now the piano rooms felt closer rather than distant. Sound no longer belonged only to others. It waited for her too. The instructors who had guided her gently began offering more consistent support, still informal, still respectful. They met with her once a week after hours, showing her how to strengthen her fingers, how to understand rhythm and harmony in clearer ways. Maria learned quickly, not because she rushed, but because her ears already understood what her hands needed to catch up with. Every new concept felt like giving a name to something she had known quietly for years. At the same time, pressure began to grow around her without being spoken aloud. Administrators discussed possibilities behind closed doors. Some saw Maria as proof that the hall nurtured unexpected talent. Others worried that encouraging her would blur professional boundaries. Maria felt the tension even when no one explained it to her. She sensed when conversations stopped as she passed, and when smiles felt careful rather than warm. One afternoon, the hall director asked her to sit with him again. This time, another administrator joined them. Their expressions were polite but serious. They spoke about responsibility and image, about how stories traveled quickly in cultural spaces. They said Maria's presence inspired people, but also raised questions. Maria listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She feared they were preparing to take something away. Instead, they proposed a compromise. Maria could continue learning and performing occasionally under the hall name, but she would need to separate that role from her job. Appearances mattered and clarity was important. They asked whether she would consider reducing her cleaning hours to make space for structured musical training. Supported by the hall, the idea frightened her deeply. Cleaning work was stability. It paid rent and food. Music had never promised either. Maria asked for time to think. The administrators agreed, though their impatience was visible. That evening, Maria walked home slowly. The city lights reflected on wet pavement. She replayed the conversation again and again. Choice felt heavier than survival had ever been. She visited her old upright piano memory in her mind, her father smiling softly as he played without concern for outcome. She wondered what he would say now. The following days were restless. Maria struggled to sleep. During work, her thoughts drifted. Even music felt distant under the weight of decision. She spoke with one of the instructors she trusted most, an older woman who had listened more than she spoke. Maria asked whether talent was worth risking security. The instructor answered gently that security without truth slowly hollowed a person, but truth without grounding could also break them. She said balance was not found in answers, but in honesty. Maria took those words with her. A few days later, the famous pianist returned for another rehearsal. He noticed Maria playing quietly during her practice time and paused to listen. Afterward, he approached her and spoke openly. He said the world rewarded courage unevenly, but always noticed sincerity eventually. He told her she had something that could last if protected carefully. He also warned her that institutions often tried to own what they did not understand. The honesty surprised Maria. She thanked him quietly. When the hall administrators requested her answer, Maria arrived prepared but nervous. She explained that she would accept reduced cleaning hours only if her music path remained flexible. She did not want rigid contracts or performances shaped only by expectation. The administrators hesitated. Compromise was not their strength. But after discussion, they agreed to a trial period. 3 months of structured learning with optional performances and continued employment. Maria felt relief mixed with fear. She had stepped into uncertainty by choice for the first time in her life. Her days changed quickly. Mornings were now split between work and lessons, afternoons filled with practice. Evenings often left her exhausted, her body ached in new ways. Muscles unused to repetition protested. Frustration surfaced when progress felt slow. There were moments when she wondered whether she had made a mistake. When mopping floors felt easier than facing her own limits, but there were also moments of deep joy. When a passage finally settled into her hands, when sound matched intention, when music felt expansive rather than hidden, not everyone supported her path. A few coworkers treated her coldly. One supervisor hinted that special treatment rarely ended well. Maria responded with quiet consistency. She worked carefully and practiced humbly. She refused to boast or defend. The instructors noticed her discipline and began trusting her more. They introduced her to ensemble work, small groups, where listening mattered more than dominance. Maria struggled at first to adjust to others. She had always played alone. But she learned to share space and sound without losing herself. One small ensemble performance took place in a community space outside the hall, simple and unadvertised. Maria played alongside students decades younger than her. The audience responded warmly, not with surprise but appreciation. Maria felt something shift again. She realized then that her story did not have to be extraordinary to be meaningful. It only needed honesty. As the 3-month period progressed, administrators observed quietly. Outcomes mattered to them. Maria's growth was undeniable but unpredictable. Toward the end of the trial, the hall director asked her how she felt. Maria answered truthfully that she felt challenged and alive, and afraid. All at once the director nodded and said that uncertainty was often the price of real work. The trial period ended without ceremony. But a decision had been made. The hall offered continued support without ownership, mentorship without branding, space without spectacle. Maria accepted with gratitude and caution. That night, she sat alone at the piano long after the building emptied. She played slowly, not for anyone listening. She understood now that the silence after music mattered as much as sound, and she was no longer afraid of it. As much as sound, and she was no longer afraid of it. The agreement with the hall changed Maria's life in ways she had not fully expected. Days that were once predictable now carried variety and challenge. She learned to move between two identities without letting either disappear. Her mornings still began early. She cleaned offices and corridors with the same care as before. But now her afternoons belonged to music. Lessons filled with instruction, patience, and discovery. The instructors introduced her to fundamentals she had never studied formally. Scales, finger independence, rhythm, reading, harmony. Maria approached each task with humility and focus. She did not rush progress, she trusted time. At first she struggled with self-doubt. Sitting beside younger students who had trained since childhood, their confidence sometimes felt intimidating. Maria reminded herself that her path was different, not lesser. Slowly she began to notice changes. Her hands grew stronger, her control improved. She could shape sound intentionally rather than instinctively. Yet she protected the emotional core of her playing carefully. Some evenings she returned home exhausted, her fingers sore and her mind crowded with corrections. On those nights she played quietly for herself without structure, reminding herself why she had chosen this path. Public attention grew gradually, not through headlines but through word of mouth. Small invitations arrived to play at community gatherings, private events, charity evenings. Maria accepted selectively. She insisted on modest settings and simple programs. She did not want music to become spectacle again. The famous pianist attended one such small performance unannounced. He stood quietly at the back of the room, listening without recognition. Afterward, he approached Maria and thanked her for reminding him why he had started playing. The moment felt full circle but gentle rather than dramatic. Not all feedback was positive. One reviewer described her playing as emotional but unrefined. The words lingered longer than praise. Maria felt the old fear return briefly. An instructor reminded her that refinement came with time, but authenticity could not be manufactured. Maria held onto that truth. As weeks turned into months, her confidence grew steadily. She no longer questioned whether she belonged in music spaces. She focused instead on how she wished to exist within them. The hall administration watched from a distance, pleased by the positive atmosphere Maria's presence created, but careful not to elevate her story too loudly. Maria appreciated that restraint. It allowed her to grow without being defined by contrast. One afternoon, the hall hosted a youth outreach program. Children from nearby neighborhoods gathered to listen to rehearsals and ask questions. Maria volunteered quietly. She sat at the piano and played a simple melody, then invited the children to describe what they felt rather than what they heard. Their answers surprised her with honesty and imagination. In that moment, Maria realized teaching might one day matter as much as performing. Her instructors noticed her natural ability to connect. They encouraged her to assist in beginner classes occasionally, Maria hesitated at first but agreed. Standing in front of students felt vulnerable, but guiding them gently, without judgment, came naturally to her. She remembered what it felt like to listen unseen. Her role within the hall expanded subtly. She was no longer only a learner but a contributor. The balance strengthened her sense of purpose. Still, challenges remained. Financial uncertainty lingered. Reduced cleaning hours meant careful budgeting. Maria learned to live simply and plan cautiously. She refused offers that promised visibility without stability. She trusted her instinct now more than fear. One evening, she received an invitation to audition for a regional music fellowship. The opportunity included funding, mentorship, and performance support. It was more structured than anything she had faced. The decision felt heavy. The fellowship required commitment and travel, but it also offered security music alone had never provided. Maria spent days considering the choice. She spoke with instructors, mentors, and the hall director. Each offered perspective without pressure. The famous pianist sent her a short message wishing her clarity rather than success. The words stayed with her. In the end, Maria chose to audition. Not as a leap of faith, but as a step of intention. Preparation was intense. She worked harder than ever, balancing technique, repertoire, and rest. Frustration surfaced but did not overwhelm her. On the day of the audition, she entered the room calmly. She played not to impress judges but to communicate. She included one classical piece and one simple original arrangement shaped by memory. The panel listened quietly, asked thoughtful questions, and thanked her warmly. Maria left without expectation. Weeks passed before the response arrived. When it did, the letter confirmed her acceptance with full support. Relief washed over her slowly rather than suddenly. The fellowship allowed Maria to reduce cleaning work further without losing stability. It offered mentorship without ownership. She accepted with gratitude and caution. Standing alone in the hall one evening, Maria played softly under dim lights. The sound carried both past and future. She understood then that success was not a moment of being seen. It was the freedom to continue choosing honesty. And she was finally free to choose again. The fellowship changed Maria's daily life more deeply than she had expected. Structure entered her world with a firmness that required adjustment. Schedules became precise, expectations clearer, time felt measured in new ways. She moved into a small shared apartment arranged through the fellowship program. It was modest but quiet and close to the training center, the first place she lived where music was part of the walls rather than something she imagined alone. Her days now began with technical practice early in the morning. Hours dedicated to strengthening fundamentals she had once avoided out of fear. Scales, arpeggios, rhythm drills. Repetition tested her patience, but she reminded herself that discipline was not punishment. Afternoons were filled with mentorship sessions, discussions about interpretation, history, and emotional responsibility. Maria listened carefully, absorbing more than she spoke. She asked questions when something felt unclear, no longer afraid of revealing what she did not know. Evenings were reserved for personal practice and reflection. She learned to pace herself. Exhaustion had taught her limits before, and she respected them now. Despite progress, doubt returned quietly at times. Surrounded by peers who had followed traditional paths, Maria sometimes felt behind. Moments of comparison crept in when she least expected them. One night after a long rehearsal, she sat alone in the practice room, staring at the keys without playing. The sound of others practicing nearby felt overwhelming. She wondered whether her late start would always separate her from those around her. Her mentor noticed the change and invited her to talk. Maria admitted her fear openly. She said she worried that her story mattered more than her skill. The mentor answered calmly that stories opened doors, but only work kept them open. He reminded her that maturity of emotion was not a weakness. It was a responsibility. Those words grounded her. As months passed, Maria's technique improved visibly. Her hands moved with greater confidence. Her control expanded without dulling her expression. Instructors noted her growth with quiet approval. Opportunities followed steadily: small recitals, collaborations, workshops. Maria accepted most but declined those that felt rushed or misaligned. She learned that saying no was as important as saying yes. The fellowship organized a mid-year concert featuring selected participants. Maria was invited to perform. The event would draw attention from regional institutions and sponsors. Preparation brought familiar pressure. Memories of laughter and scrutiny surfaced briefly. But Maria faced them with steadier breaths. She chose a program that reflected balance. One classical piece shaped carefully, and one arrangement rooted in simplicity and warmth. The night of the concert, the hall filled with listeners attentive rather than curious. Maria stepped onto the stage without hesitation. She felt grounded rather than exposed. Her performance unfolded with clarity and sincerity. Mistakes did not disappear, but they did not define the moment. The audience responded with thoughtful applause. Afterwards, several professionals approached her with interest. Conversations felt respectful rather than invasive. Back at the community hall where her journey had begun, news of her progress reached familiar ears. Coworkers spoke of her with pride. Some who had once doubted now watched quietly. The hall director sent a brief message congratulating her and wishing her steadiness. Maria appreciated the restraint. She continued visiting the hall occasionally to help with outreach programs, teaching children listening skills rather than technique. She believed attention was the first lesson. One afternoon, a young cleaner approached her shyly and said watching Maria had changed how she viewed herself. The words touched Maria deeply. She realized then that her presence mattered beyond music. Still, challenges remained. The fellowship required evaluations and reviews. Pressure returned during assessment periods. Maria learned to prepare without panic. One review noted that her technical growth was strong but encouraged further refinement. Maria accepted the feedback calmly. Another praised her emotional intelligence and connection. She smiled quietly at that. As the fellowship year progressed, a final showcase approached. This performance would determine continuation and further support. The weight of the moment was real, but Maria did not allow it to consume her. She prepared steadily, resting when needed, trusting consistency. The famous pianist who had once laughed attended the showcase quietly. Maria noticed him in the audience but did not let it distract her. When she played, she felt neither fear nor need to impress. Only clarity. The music carried confidence shaped by experience rather than defense. When the final note faded, the room responded with warmth, not spectacle. Afterward, the pianist approached her and said little. Only that joy sounded strongest when it was earned slowly. Maria thanked him sincerely. The fellowship confirmed her continuation with extended support and mentorship. Stability settled into her life gradually. That night, Maria walked alone through quiet streets, reflecting on the journey behind her. She understood now that growth did not erase hardship. It gave it meanings. She no longer feared being seen or being forgotten. She trusted the work, and the music continued to meet her where she stood. As Maria entered the later months of the fellowship, she noticed a quiet change in how she carried herself. She no longer moved through rooms cautiously waiting for permission. She moved with awareness and intention, still gentle but grounded. Her daily routine had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Mornings began with focused practice. Afternoons with collaborative work and mentorship, evenings with reflection and rest. The balance felt earned rather than imposed. Peers who once viewed her with curiosity now treated her as an equal. Conversations shifted from background and surprise to interpretation and ideas. Maria welcomed this change quietly. She began collaborating with other musicians more often. Chamber pieces, small ensembles, shared rehearsals. Learning to blend without disappearing challenged her in new ways. Listening became as important as playing. She learned when to lead and when to support. The lessons echoed her life experience more than any formal instruction. One collaboration in particular stayed with her, a duet with a violinist who struggled with rigidity. Maria encouraged warmth and flexibility through sound rather than words. The result surprised them both. The mentor overseeing the project remarked that Maria brought calm to spaces where tension usually lived. The comment stayed with her. Outside the fellowship, Maria life felt steadier. Financial stress eased, though simplicity remained. She still lived modestly, choosing comfort over display. She visited her old community occasionally. Walking streets she once rushed through, now seeing faces she recognized from years before. Some people remembered her as the quiet cleaner, others now knew her as a musician. Maria did not correct either. Both were true. One afternoon she returned to the concert hall where everything had begun, invited to observe a rehearsal rather than participate. She sat in the back listening. The hall felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had the piano no longer felt unreachable. It felt familiar. The famous pianist was not there this time, but younger performers filled the space with ambition and nerves. Maria recognized the tension immediately. She watched a young performer struggle under pressure and felt an urge to speak. Later, she approached, gently offering reassurance rather than advice. The performers thanked her, saying her presence made the space feel safer. Maria understood then how far she had come. At the fellowship, a new opportunity emerged, a proposal to record a small collection of pieces, not for commercial release, but for archival and educational use. The idea unsettled Maria. Recording felt permanent in a way live performance did not. Still, she considered it carefully. Her mentor encouraged her to view recording as documentation rather than judgment, a snapshot of a moment rather than a final statement. Maria agreed with conditions. The pieces would be chosen by her and recorded simply without heavy editing. The sessions were quiet and focused. Microphones captured nuance and breath. Maria played slowly, allowing space between phrases. Listening back to the recordings was difficult at first. She noticed every flaw, every hesitation. But over time, she learned to hear the whole rather than the parts. She recognized growth not just in skill but in trust. As the fellowship year neared its end, discussions about the future began again. Options included extended mentorship, teaching roles, collaborative projects. Maria did not rush decisions. She had learned the cost of haste. She spent time journaling, reflecting on what mattered most. Freedom, honesty, connection. One evening she sat alone at the piano and played without structure, allowing memories and hopes to surface naturally. She thought about the moment she had been laughed at and the silence that followed. How that silence had become the foundation of her path. The final evaluation of the fellowship arrived without drama. Feedback was thorough, respectful, and encouraging. Continuation was offered along with expanded responsibility. Maria accepted with gratitude and clarity. She requested time to shape her role rather than stepping into predefined expectations. Her mentors agreed, appreciating her thoughtfulness. As she walked home that night, the city felt calm rather than overwhelming. Lights reflected softly on the pavement. Music echoed quietly in her mind. She realized that success no longer felt like escape. It felt like alignment. She was no longer proving she deserved space. She was choosing how to use it. And the journey was still unfolding. The years that followed unfolded with steady purpose rather than sudden change. Maria continued her work through the fellowship and beyond, shaping a life that balanced music service and personal truth. She accepted a dual role that allowed her to perform selectively while also mentoring others. The structure suited her. It kept her connected to sound without turning it into spectacle. Her performances became less frequent but more intentional, each one chosen for meaning rather than exposure. Audiences listened not because of her past, but because of what her music carried. She never chased fame, and in return it never chased her. Instead, respect grew quietly through shared spaces and honest work. At the community level, Maria helped design outreach programs that welcomed people without expectations. Children, adults, workers, cleaners, students all sat together listening, and sometimes playing. She insisted that no one be introduced by background or hardship, only by name. When asked about her journey, Maria spoke plainly. She said she had listened long before she was heard, and that listening had shaped her more than applause ever could. The famous pianist who had once laughed at her remained part of her story, but not its center. Years later, they shared a stage briefly during a charity event. The moment passed without comment or drama. Afterward, he thanked her for teaching him something he had forgotten. Maria smiled and said nothing more. She continued visiting the concert hall where her story began, sometimes to perform, sometimes simply to listen. The space no longer defined her role. New cleaners worked there now. Maria greeted them warmly and learned their names. She understood how powerful recognition could be. One evening, she noticed a young woman pausing near the piano after hours listening quietly. Maria did not interrupt. She waited until the music ended and asked gently whether the sound mattered to her. The woman nodded shyly. Maria invited her to sit and listen more closely. No pressure, no expectation. The cycle continued naturally. As time passed, Maria's compositions grew deeper, shaped by lived experience rather than ambition. Some were shared, others remained private. She no longer felt the need to offer everything she created. Her life settled into a rhythm that felt honest. Mornings filled with quiet practice, afternoons with teaching, evenings with rest or reflection. She found joy in small things: walking, listening, breathing, allowing silence to exist. One day, a documentary team approached her asking to tell her story. Maria declined politely. She explained that her life was not a lesson but a life. They respected her answer and moved on. At a later performance, a child in the audience asked her why her music felt calm. Maria answered that calm came from being allowed to speak without fear. The child nodded as if understanding something important. Years later, Maria stood once again alone in an empty hall after a long day. She sat at the piano and played softly. The sound echoed gently. She remembered the laughter that had once filled the space and the silence that followed. Both felt distant now. She realized that joy had never been something to perform. It was something to protect. Maria closed the piano and stood quietly for a moment. Gratitude settled in her chest, not loud but complete. She had not silenced the hall that day long ago. She had reminded it how to listen. And that was enough. She had not silenced the hall that day long ago. She had reminded it how to listen. And that was enough.